Welcome, everybody, to another speedrun episode. In the last couple, we've been toggling between 10-minute games and 5-minute games, which I think produces a nice balance. A nice balance of different formats, but also different ratings, because our Blitz rating is quite a bit higher than our standard rating. But we always start with a 10-minute game, so let's jump in. And we have black against a 1261. Okay, e4, c5. We're still firmly at the level where we rarely face open Sicilians. Okay, our opponent plays an Alapin against us. So the tables turn a little bit. Usually we're the ones posing problems with the Alapin, and we've obviously faced the Alapin on multiple occasions. And those of you who've listened attentively know that I've made one very specific recommendation. It's a line that is not as well known as the kind of big two main lines, which is d5, ed, queen takes d5, and of course knight f6. The other lines in this position are typically do not have as good of a reputation, but this particular line often flies under the radar because it's considered to be kind of a gimmicky gambit line. But the reality is that it actually equalizes. Like if you check very deeply with an engine, the line that I play myself in high level blitz is d5, e takes d5, and then not queen takes d5, but actually knight to f6. And I've talked a lot about the theory from both sides. But here we face the move e5, which is a pretty reasonable move on the surface. White is trying to essentially shepherd us into an advanced French, like white wants to go d4 on the next move. There's one big difference. There's one reason why e5 is not more popular, and that is, of course, the fact that we have not committed to the move e6. So here we get kind of a perfect dream advanced French. We can allow white to play d4. The important point is to develop the bishop to f5 and then close up with e6. So we can start with knight c6. That's the most straightforward way to begin. And now we basically have the advanced French pawn structure, but we're able to develop the bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop f5. So this is kind of the main reason why e5 is completely innocuous. And even though it may not seem this way right now, white's center is far from safe, and it can collapse very, very quickly because white is just not able to coordinate their pieces in the right way. And of course, here we play e6. And literally, if you repositioned the bishop to c8 and it was black to move, we would have a direct transposition to the French. So the fact that you're able to get the bishop outside the pawn chain, very, very important factor in evaluating these types of structures. Okay, now what to do in this position? Very instructive moment. Now, some of you might be like, well, okay, the whole point in the French is you want to get rid of your light squared bishop, so let's just trade on d3. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with trading on d3. Other people might want to go like bishop to g6 and trade on your own terms, or even like knight g to e7. But I actually think this bishop is much more of an asset than a liability. Once it's developed outside the pawn chain, it's an integral part of the pressure that we are putting on white's d4 pawn, and simply trading it off kind of lets white get away scot-free. So the move that I really like here is actually bishop to g4. Now, yes, we're moving the bishop twice in the opening, but there's a very specific purpose behind it. We're pinning the knight. We're creating massive pressure on the d4 pawn. And we basically have a direct threat of taking on f3 and taking on d4 and either winning a pawn or completely crippling white's kingside pawn structure. As a matter of fact, white ignores the threat. And I don't see a reason why we can't just go after the material advantage here. So let's start with c takes d4, very straightforward play. Now, at this point, there's multiple things we can do. We can also bring the queen out to b6. But let's play kind of very thematically. Bishop takes f3, boom. If white takes to the queen, white drops the d4 pawn with tempo. If white takes to the pawn, well, that is just disgusting. And white's king is going to have nowhere to go in the long run. And that's not to say the d4 pawn is safe. In that position, we would still go after that pawn with queen b6. So white does take with the queen. We play knight takes d4. And one nice little subtlety. If white delivers a check on a4, is that a scary check? Why or why not? Okay, white blunders the bishop with a fork. Why is the check on a4 not scary? It's actually not because the knight drops back to c6, which I'm sure some people are thinking. Knight c6 solidifies the advantage, but actually black wins the game, I'm pretty sure, with the move b5. Just using this knight to counterattack the bishop, and everything is hanging. Okay, goodbye. Knight takes c2, and white instantly resigns. Okay, nice little miniature. So c3, d5. I don't think we've ever faced the move e5. I'm going to double check it very quickly on the engine just to make sure that I played correctly here. But you can see how difficult it is to play the advanced French pawn structure if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, so e5. Yeah, there are games in the database. Yeah, so the engine does like knight c6 and bishop f5. The position is equal, right? So don't think that just because we've done this, the black is much better or black is winning. But in order to keep the position balanced, white has to play with tremendous precision, and white has to make some moves that are not obvious at all. So after knight f3, e6, bishop d3 is a pretty serious inaccuracy because it allows our bishop to jump onto g4. We actually could have also played bishop e4, very similar type of idea, applying pressure on the knight via the other direction. This would have also been very good. What should white do in this position? Well, white should prioritize development and bring the bishop out to e2. This is an important subtlety, and here the position is equal. So the computer line here is actually cd, n, g, e7. Okay, pretty typical French moves so far. Now, one cool subtlety is that black's next move is likely to be bishop to e4. This is obviously an idea that you don't encounter in the French. So let's say white castles. Black establishes this really nice stronghold on e4. And obviously the whole point is that after knight f5, capturing the bishop leads to kind of the immediate collapse of your pawn chain. You're going to lose the d4 pawn because black's attacking it 3 different ways. So this is a good idea to kind of put in your pocket. So the computer recommends, so the position is approximately equal, but I would still argue that black is in the driver's seat here because we've gotten everything that we've wanted. Bishop e3 is the correct move here. Bishop e7. And slowly white can kind of equalize by playing a bunch of careful moves. But still, I mean, this is like a perfect French position where we have long-term pressure on the pawn, and nobody in their right mind would prefer to be white here. So in a nutshell, that's why e5 is a pretty bad move. E takes d5, knight f6 is my Alapin recommendation for black, and we've had a bunch of games in this line. Obviously, this is technically a gambit because white could secure the extra pawn with c4. But we've had a bunch of games go like this. e6, and black gets tremendous compensation for the pawn. So I won't delve into the theory right now. It's outside the scope of this game. What else is there to say? Bishop g4, pretty straightforward. Bishop to c2, that was a weird move. And already after bishop takes f3, I think white is borderline lost. Because once you lose the d4 pawn for nothing, you're in huge trouble. Of course, white had to play gf. But we can go queen b6. We can also go queen h4, which is a nice little move. And if white plays f4, now we can essentially put on our French hats and start massacring white's center with the move f6. Very thematic French move. And the knight is getting out to h6. This is just a miserable position for white. Our king can go queenside, by the way, here. So anyways, simple, powerful. Again, knowing the fundamentals will help you win a lot of fast games like this, right? Knowing that you should bring your bishop out to f5. All right, let's do another 10-minute game. And this time we have the white pieces. Let's go. And will we get a Gleck? We might. Knight c3. No. Still, another Philidor. Honestly, I'm just stunned at how many people at all levels are playing the Philidor. It's just like a plague. Now, again, I'm not going to keep repeating this every time we face the Philidor. You've got several options here as white. You can play d4, which is the main move. But if you want to sidestep some of the, hot button theory, you can also play this kind of Italian style with bishop c4 and d3, which is obviously a more modest treatment of the position, but it's an easy line to play. In this game, I'd like to go d4. Let's go main line. And black plays e takes d4. Now, one move that I've really taken a liking to in a lot of different positions, but especially in this one, is actually queen takes d4, which definitely is not an intuitive move for most people because you're like, well, what about knight c6? And the point is a very specific one. Knight c6 is met with bishop b5. White trades the bishop for the knight, ensuring the long-term safety of the queen. And provided that the queen is safe in the center, which it will be, it's actually a great asset. And it can help you carry out the e5 pawn break. Black's position is very cramped and nasty. So I like queen takes d4. It's a good practical weapon. Knight b to d7. Okay, well, that doesn't really you know, that doesn't really scare us in any way whatsoever, which means we can calmly continue with our development. Obviously, I'm looking at this f7 pawn. It's a very tender pawn. And I'm already seeing the potential for some nasty tactics that could act as a cold shower for black if he plays bishop b7 at the wrong moment. Let's set it up with bishop c4. And we're hoping for bishop b7 here, which would walk right into kind of the lion's den and would walk right into a very instructive sequence, actually. Okay, this is what we're praying for. The problem is, yeah, at this level, the likelihood that our opponent plays any given move, no matter how logical, is very, very low. So c6, yeah, black is clearly not confident and is playing moves that he knows are played in the Philidor, but he's playing them in the wrong order, and black's position just looks awful. But let's be disciplined in terms of how we punish this. So knight g5 here. Very tempting move. Thank you, Phoenix, for the subs. But it's met with knight d7 to e5. And we certainly don't want to give away our bishop. So I've said this before, I'll say it again. The kind of default way to punish this sort of, bad but not horrible opening play is just to play very positionally and very patiently. So c6, right? What does black want? Well, very likely if you've faced the Philidor before, you know that black has this nasty little plan of queenside expansion with b5. And the one big downside of queen takes d4 is that you might walk into a Noah's Ark trap if you're not careful. So for instance, let's say you play, bishop e3, and black plays b5, and you drop the bishop back to b3. Black can then push the c pawn down to c4 with tempo. But that's not the end of the story, because black is so poorly developed that you could actually meet b5, potentially with a sacrifice. You could play a bishop takes b5 or knight takes b5, but I don't want to bog us down with all of these complications. Let's just go a4 and root out the problem. Okay, so our opponent was actually intending d5. I don't get this move at all. Let's grab it. I'll bite. Okay, bishop c5 is a tempo move. Yes, congratulations. Our opponent has made one threat, but now the queen has the entire board at its disposal. Where would you move the queen? Where would you move the queen here? It's a potentially important learning moment for a lot of people. I think there's two good squares, but there's one square that really appeals to me. So h4 is what most of you are thinking. I actually really like the square d3, because what is the queen doing on e3? Well, it's doing two main things. The first is that it's aiming at the h7 pawn. So already I'm setting up in my mind various tactics related to the move knight g5. The second is that I'm essentially supervising the center, whereas after queen h4, I would get uncomfortably far away from the center. Maybe you'd be walking into some, knight b6 ideas, or the x-ray, the queen Mexican standoff situation there is unnecessary. Why allow it when you have a perfectly good alternate square? Okay, queen to e7. So here again, we have a lot of options, but let's just block it with our bishop. And I think, okay, I assume our opponent is going to take this. In response to which we have a very nifty tactic. No, c takes d5. Okay, so we just continue playing straightforwardly, grab the pawn. Am I playing best moves? Definitely not. I think there was a way perhaps to squeeze maybe even a decisive advantage to punish black more decisively, but we're playing simple chess, and there's nothing wrong with that. Castle's kingside. Okay, so now, of course, the question is, which side should we castle? And standard attacking logic dictates that you want to castle to the side of the board opposite to the side where you're attacking, but that's not really always true. In fact, the opposite is true here. Why? Because very likely there will be a trade on e3, and we're going to recapture with a pawn on e3, and when we do, we will want a rook on f1 already aiming at the f7 pawn. So if you're attacking primarily with your pieces, this rule about trying to tuck your king away on the other side is not really applicable. We're not attacking with the pawns here, and so you should distinguish in your mind between, majority pawn attacks and majority piece attacks. Okay, knight f6. Okay, so again, lots of good stuff that we can do here, but let's start tightening the screws. Enough playtime. Let's get down to business here. So, what do I like in this position? Well, given that our opponent didn't trade on e3, that's given us a nice opportunity to make an annoying move, and a move that simply increases the pressure dial, which is the move bishop to g5. Suddenly saying, wait a second, you had your chance all along to trade. You didn't do it. No more chances. Now I'm going to use this bishop. I'm going to pin your knight, and I'm going to clear open the e file and start harassing black's queen. Okay. H6, obviously, bishop h4. Black could play h6 and g5, and that would walk into a lovely tactic. Rook d8, also not scary for many reasons. We can play c4, we can play rook e1, and something's gonna give there. I can feel it. There's gonna be some tactic after rook d8 because black is just too uncoordinated, and he plays it just as I'm talking about it. So let's be accurate here. All right, so ooh, calculating a nice line here. Just a second. There's one very important line I'm trying to figure out. Okay, yes, it works. I was trying to figure out if we could get away with rook e1. And what is there to figure out? Like after rook e1, what is it that you have to calculate there? And actually, as a bonus, which rook should you put on e1? Should you play rook a1 or rook fe1? This is a very advanced question. And the answer hinges on a rather deep tactical motif. The answer is actually rook a to e1. And you're like, well, this looks completely counterintuitive because what's this rook doing? Well, there we go. Rook takes d5. This is the move that I spend the majority of time calculating. And here we have to find a suitable response because there's a lot of pieces hanging. And it's easy for white to accidentally lose material. So for instance, if you take the queen, then black will take our queen, and then our rook will be hanging. And we don't have a checkmate on e8. Now, some of you are probably seeing queen takes d5. But there too, it's not convincing. Black can play knight takes d5, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and black is sort of hanging by a thread there. I think white's probably better, but not winning. But there is one more move that I think is maybe even the hardest to spot out of all the candidate moves, and I think it's the strongest. And that move, ooh, wait a second. I just spotted something. Something bad. One sec. Oh my gosh, bishop takes f6, black has queen takes e1. Well, we have knight takes c1, obviously, in return, and we're up a pawn, but can we extract more meat from the bone? Wait, let me think here. This is actually a really interesting position. Even queen c3 or queen c4 should be considered in such a situation. Now, just a moment, guys. I want to make the right call here. Maybe we come back to queen takes d5 for a second. Queen takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes e7. Black has to play knight takes e7. That's forced. Okay, we play rook e5. If bishop d6, then rook d1. So black is forced to play b6. Then we need to find a strong move. Almost there. c3, too slow. Rook d1, too slow. I have 2 minutes on my clock, too slow. All right, fine. We'll play bishop takes f6. I forgot there's no increment for some reason. And after the game, we'll check this with an engine. Okay, wait a second. Now, this is actually getting complicated. Could play bishop d4 here. Play rook e8. I think rook e8 is fine. Now, queen takes d5, queen takes d5, and the black bishop covers the check. This is what you guys should all be seeing. It's the fact that, no, it's not that easy here. Okay, let's go bishop d4. Let's play the positional option. I need to hustle here because I've got a minute and a half for the rest of the game. Somehow I got too bogged down in the complexities of the position. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit more silent than usual, but I do need to focus. Our opponent is playing way above his rating. Okay. I also blundered bishop a6, which is okay. Gotta go here. Yeah, so now I allowed black. Ooh, but I laid a devilish trap, and black does not fall into it. Queen takes b5. There was c4. Oh, that was sick. Sick trap. Okay, so our opponent is playing very well. Still playing very well. Yes, for 1100 to find all of these moves is definitely odd. That's not a controversial statement. I mean, he could also just be smurfing, so I'm not going to jump to any conclusions here. I'm actually potentially losing here if I... Yeah, definitely our opponent is up to something. There's no question about it. It is slam dunk, sadly. But it's a drawn position. I mean, at first he was playing on his own, and then sadly, it appears that the playing strength has increased tremendously. I should have enabled pre-moves, actually. Not for a draw, which is summarily declined. Our opponent is going to demonstrate some incredible endgame technique right now. I can feel it. Something tells me. This is actually sick. The way our opponent is winning this is completely inhuman, of course, but also just really, really instructive. Rook a2 check. Yeah. Sad way to end the game, but it is what it is. We're gonna encounter people like that, and that's okay. Let's try a levy trap or something of that nature. Now maybe he'll start playing on his own toward the end of the game. That's happened before, and sometimes I'm able to pull out like a draw out of an impossible position. Okay, I'm gonna get oops, and I mouse slipped, but it doesn't matter. He would have spent 3 seconds anyway. All right. Yeah. So obvious case of somebody turning on the engine, and right around here, it's not even, wasn't even trying to hide it. I will report. Yeah, I lost at 1200. Now, obviously, the first like 15 moves were interesting, and clearly the guy was playing on his own. But you guys can see, I mean, I just got totally outplayed from the middle game onwards. Generally, 1100s don't play this well. I will, of course, double check on Stockfish. I will do my due diligence, so I'm not making any direct accusations just yet. I feel like I actually played really well, or we played really well to start the game. But then, obviously, as he started finding all of these very testing moves, queen d7, top engine move. Bishop d4, exclaim. Actually, I also found a bunch of good moves. Yeah, okay, actually. Okay, bishop a6. And I'm just checking the... Yeah. I mean, actually, what made me the most suspicious is this. How many of you would take on d1 here? I thought this was I thought this was losing. But it turns out that black is totally fine here because white can't take on a7 because of this checkmate. So this is just one example of okay, black found this in 3 seconds. Now, obviously, the endgame is drawn, but I had very little interest in playing it because I knew what we were up against. Yeah, every single move is top engine move. Every single one. And black is not even trying to hide it, sadly. Also, okay, another signpost. In this situation, how many of you would not take the pawn when it's offered to you and instead start with h5 and only then take the pawn? Is that something that people do in blitz games at this level? Not to my knowledge. Now, black, I can see that black made some mistakes, but this is either a smurf or it's a cheater, in my estimation, given the accuracy. Let's check his previous games. An ordinary guy who likes to write an E. Joined 24 days ago. He's won all of his games so far. Okay, yeah. That's unfortunate. But let's take a look at the tactical complications. Let's put the cheating aside. We're gonna play a couple of people like this. It's, I think, good to treat this thing philosophically. You're going to encounter people who cheat on whichever website you play. That's just going to happen, and there's no reason in getting upset about things you can control. I know that this is a very sensitive topic on YouTube, so hopefully people are able to see that I am suspicious, not because I lost the game. That has very little to do with it. Even had the game ended in a draw, I would have said the same things. It's just obvious that an 1100 is playing at the level of 2800. So hopefully, you can see my logic. He's also won all of his games without exception on chess.com. He's made his account 24 days ago. And the start of the game was played at an 1100 level. And around move 15, every single move coincided with the top engine recommendation. So, it's just, what am I to think when I look at this? This is not about ego. It's just about objective conclusions. So, in any case, let's actually get down to the interesting parts of the game. So, I decided on this move, queen takes d4, and it does give white a very nice edge. And the point, of course, is knight c6 is met with bishop b5. And if black plays bishop to d7, which is the most popular response, you don't have to take on c6. Actually, the computer, it likes bishop takes c6. It also likes queen d3, but I would take on c6. And if bishop takes c6, white just gets this very, very nice edge. Great development. Just a easy play. And you could go short castle. You could also go long castle. And then put a rook on e1. Just look at white's coordination here and look at how cramped black is. Very, very difficult to untangle if you're black. Commonly, people try to go knight d7 in this type of position, intending bishop f6. How should white respond to this move? Somewhat positional exercise for people. How should white respond to knight d7? And this is going to lead me to an instructive point, so listen carefully. Yes, the correct move is e5. So when you have this major superiority in general piece activity, in general, you will benefit from opening up the center. But here, there are a lot of specific details that have to be factored in. One of them is that black can actually take the knight on f3. And if you simply recapture, then black plays knight takes e5. It may appear that white is winning a piece after bishop takes e5, d5, queen e5, because you have a double attack on the queen and the bishop. But common idea, bishop d6 and black is actually better. So here you have to factor in the intermezzo, e takes d6. And if black now plays bishop f6, d takes c7, another intermezzo, hitting the queen and hitting the knight. So if black takes the queen, oops, no, we don't do that. We take the queen, and then we take the bishop, and black is losing more material because bishop c7's coming in. So that's bishop takes f3. If black takes on e5, which is obviously the most straightforward response, we play knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. Now again, black has bishop d6. And we simply drop our queen back to d4. You might say, well, aren't we just trading a bunch of pieces? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Well, what happens at the end is a situation where black simply has no good spot to put the queen. This is the direct effect of a superiority in piece activity. It's oftentimes the queen that bears the brunt of the punishment. Because if you play queen f6, you get into an endgame that's really, really nasty because your king side is totally ruined, and white can infiltrate to e7 later on. So takes knight c5, for example, is really good for white. If black slides the queen to c8, then the rook is out of the game, and our rook infiltrates e7. So oftentimes when you open the center, it's not immediately apparent that you benefit, but you have to look a little bit deeper and realize that the side of the more active pieces, particularly if you have rooks on d1 and e1 like this, you're going to create a lot of problems for your opponent's queen. Okay, so that's a little bit of an overview of knight c6, bishop b5. Our opponent played nbd7. I developed my bishop to c4. And I was really hoping for bishop e7, which potentially would have walked into this tactic, bishop takes f7 and knight g5. Super common idea everywhere, really, in its various forms. But there's actually a fascinating detail here. This position is equal. And this is a fantastic exercise for the slightly higher rated players watching this on YouTube. Where should the king go? There's only one move that saves the game, and it's actually the least intuitive. So some of you might say, oh, well, king g6. But king g6, f4 is a disaster. White's going to go f5, and you're going to get massacred immediately. You can't go to f8 because you walk into a fork. Now, if you go to g8, this is the important moment. No, white does not play knight e6. White's intentions are far more violent. You go queen c4 check. d5, knight takes d5, and that's it. The king is toast. I actually had a very similar combination one time many years ago. Generally, combinations with an unexpected sack on f7 are very frequently missed even by good players. Let's see if I can pull this one up real quick. Yeah, so here we go. Yeah, so I'm playing this Russian 1960 good player. And in this position, totally normal, like Ruy Lopez, seemingly nothing to write home about, black plays the move d5. And here I suddenly spotted an idea that got me really, really excited. White to play. Who can spot the setup move and then the actual tactic after black's response? What's the setup move, and then what are you trying to provoke, and why are you trying to provoke it? Yeah, so the setup move is bishop b3, hitting the d5 pawn. My opponent, totally unsuspecting, he goes d4. And here, bishop takes f7 out of nowhere. Out of nowhere, king takes f7, but the same elements exist in almost every instance of this sacrifice. You have this knight check on g5, and if the king moves to f8 or g7, it gets forked. And if it goes back to g8, the queen comes out. This is the move that's easy to miss, queen b3 check. And either black gets forked or black gets destroyed with a checkmating attack, like so. Okay, so in any case, just keep an eye out for bishop takes f7 tactics. But in this case, black has a miracle-saving idea, which is to play king e8. And you're like, well, that's impossible. White goes knight e6. This is the whole point. The queen is trapped. But now black has c5. And it opens up an avenue for the black queen to escape through this diagonal. Very unconventional idea, actually. I've never seen this exact concept before. White is supposed to go queen back to d1. Black deploys the queen to b6. And as a matter of fact, white is still slightly better. Like, white still has a long-lasting attack, and black's king is in big trouble. So this is not a solution to all of black's ills, but at least it keeps the queen alive. In any case, bishop f7 was not mandatory, by the way. We could have also just castled. But our opponent goes c6. And now we decided to go a4 to prevent d5 shenanigans. Our opponent just gives up a pawn. And things started getting kind of tactical around here. Something really interesting is that after bishop takes e3, what is the best move in the position, in your opinion? What would you do with white in this position? This is another tough question. The best move is, I would say, an IM or GM level move, actually. The best move. The best move is a GM level move. It's short castle. Yeah, you just ignore the bishop. Why on earth would you short castle here? What are we doing? Well, first of all, if you simply recapture on e3, you give black a target. And black can start developing some counterplay with a nasty little knight jump to g4. So the point of castling is that you're trying to circumvent all of these problems because the bishop simply can't move. If it moves away, then obviously it's opening up a simple pin along the e-file. So it's actually not that hard to unpack the concept behind this move. It's just a scary move to play. If black plays cd, you just recapture it. The bishop on e3 is just chilling there. You don't care for how long. Eventually, you're going to recapture it. But not until you're ready. In any case, cd, knight d5. So we traded. And suddenly, after knight f6, things get tactical again. So I played bishop g5, which turns out is an inaccuracy according to the computer. And after rook d8, where was my mistake? Yes, my mistake was rook a1. This was a miscalculation on my part. The correct move here was I had a tactic. Oh, and I didn't see this one. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and here there's a tactic that wins a pawn. Who can spot it? And it's actually the only move that grants a big advantage. Everything else gives black a decent position. Wow, so many tactical concepts here. Bishop takes f7, double deflection. Queen f7, queen d8, and if king f7, you pick up the bishop with a fork. So you win a second pawn. Black does have the bishop pair. So black should, of course, not take this bishop, but white can slide the queen up to c4. Bishop is protected, and white is up 2 pawns for minimal compensation. I didn't see that. I played rook a1. Now, where did I miscalculate? So I miscalculated in 2 separate areas. First of all, after rook takes d5, initially, I thought that queen takes d5 was a safe option that would give a nice advantage. But it turns out, actually, that after knight takes d5, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, black is winning. Like, it's +2 for black. And the reason it's +2 for black consists of one very specific line. White plays rook e5, and if black plays the careless bishop d6, you run into rook d1. And this I calculated because you can't take the rook because of back rank mate. But you can simply play b6, everything is solidified, the bishop is coming out, and black has 2 pieces for a rook, which is to the benefit of the 2 bishops here. So, as a matter of fact, this would be a very bad move, and that's why I settled on bishop takes f6. And here I missed 2 separate things. The first is that black has this resource, queen takes e1. And if white plays queen takes d5, then black has checkmate in 3 moves with bishop takes f2. So here we would have to play knight takes e1. It's actually a miracle that white even has this. Rook d3, knight d3, and we counterattack the bishop, and white maintains a small advantage. But I also missed our opponent's move, queen d7. I thought this was impossible for some reason because of this line. And here I spotted bishop e7, and I was like, oh, okay, mate. But this is not mate. Black just goes h6. And it looks very imposing, but it's a bunch of hot air. White's attack fizzles out before it even begins, and black is better. So in any case, this I also miscalculated. We drop the bishop back to d4, which is actually a really nice move. The point, of course, is that black can't take because of the back rank mate. Here, I was already low on time, and I actually blundered. c3, bishop b7. Queen e3 is a blunder. If black had played bishop a6 immediately, this would have simply won an exchange. But obviously here, after the trade on d4, I think our opponent started relying on the engine. And once the trade happens, the position is, dead equal. So very fascinating middle game in this game. And a shame that seemingly our opponent was doing something fishy. But congratulations. First victory for our opponent in the speedrun. Any questions about this game? I know that was a lot of tactics, but you got to expose yourself to these complicated themes if you want to learn how to handle these positions in your own games, right? You can't be spoon-fed everything. Sometimes you just have to plunge in and get your hands dirty and analyze. This is why you analyze, to learn ideas. Let's play a 5-minute game. Okay. Viejo Zorro, 1660. We're a little higher rated in blitz. Okay, d3. An unimposing line, which in and of itself doesn't have a lot of independent value because typically white follows up with knight c3 and g3, commonly known as the closed Sicilian. So our response to this move is not particularly important. We can go knight c6. Okay, f4. So white is playing this like old school Grand Prix setup. And against the old school Grand Prix setup, it's long been known that white is best advised to start with knight c3. And the reason is very simple. You're preventing d5. So we seize the opportunity here to go d5. And again, we get this French-like structure where, in contrast to the French, we're actually able to bring the bishop out to f5. But if you've seen any of Hikaru's games, you'll know that he handles these positions really well with black. And there's a lot of things that black can do here. Because white is lagging in development, ideally, I'd like to open the center as quickly as possible. And there's an easy way to do that. If you're a French player, this move should be basically automatic to you, and that's the move f6. Now, it looks like an exotic move, but it's not. It basically forces the trade. Let's recapture with a knight to accelerate our development. And black has essentially like a dream French setup. c3, white continues to not develop. And the formula against this type of play is clear. We need to continue opening up the center because before we know it, we're just going to massacre white's king in the center. And so e5 here, very thematic move. Very thematic move. The tactics are all going to work in our favor because we have this huge lead in development already. So you can kind of trust without calculating that white's not going to have any shenanigans with 0 pieces developed. Okay, bishop d6. Yeah, I have no clue what our opponent is doing. Finally, they develop a piece, but whew, let's castle. No, the game is over. I mean, white's not getting out of this. This is a stinking pile of garbage. Okay, so our opponent is trying to quickly scramble to get his pieces out and castle, but it's too late. How do we punish white without allowing bishop g2 and castles? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can do it. I would argue the most straightforward move is rook e8, just playing down the e-file. But we're not straightforward people in the speedrun. We're fancy. We're grandmaster level players here. And the other method is to apply direct pressure on the f4 pawn, because this is white's biggest target, and your goal is to get white to play f takes e5, which opens up the f-file, which prevents white from castling. What is the easiest and most efficient way of applying pressure on f4? And well, it's the move knight h5. Knight h5. Not queen c7, right? Queen c7 doesn't actually attack the f-pawn. Typically, when I say apply pressure or attack something, your default should be to do it with a minor piece, because minor pieces are more effective they're more disposable than a queen. So you should use your queen more sparingly for more important tasks. This is the GM move, knight h5. This is what I would play in a classical game, most likely. White has no moves. If white continues while ignoring our ideas, we simply start eating through the pawn chain. Big deal. White took a pawn with check. That changes absolutely nothing. In fact, it makes things even worse for white because now this bishop is also a vulnerability. And the pawn on h3 will fall as well if white castles. Okay, g4. But it's important not to lose your discipline here because, you know, particularly more slippery players are going to keep fighting and stay afloat. And you want to be precise here so that the game doesn't drag on. Okay, so I'm looking at this bishop on d5, and immediately I'm starting to connect the dots in my head. What we could try to do is set up a situation where we give the knight away on h5. We play a move like f3, which I'm going to make. And then at the right moment, we open up a discovery against the bishop on d5 and win a minor piece. Alternatively, we could do the same thing by delivering a queen fork on g5 once white's king escapes to d2. The order doesn't really matter. Let's start with f takes e2. Simplest. Okay, king takes e2, I didn't even consider. There are a gazillion winning moves here. But let's see if we can win in style. What's the stylish way to win this game? And not just the stylish way, but the, once again, most efficient way. Well, in order to checkmate the king, you need to access squares. The attack isn't going to win itself. You need to actually infiltrate. And to infiltrate, you need to identify potential infiltration squares. Now, you already know that there's the possibility of a discovered attack against the white bishop. So why not use that in order to gain a tempo and set up the decisive infiltration? So I'm not talking about queen h4. I'm actually talking about bishop to g3. Bishop to g3. Threatening rook f2, threatening the bishop on d5, and winning on the spot. Queen h4 also wins. Okay, and simply pick up the piece. I've said this a million times. If you're attacking and you have an opportunity to bank a minor piece, do it. Obviously, if it doesn't come at the cost of your attack. Don't bog yourself down looking for mate and tunnel visioning when you can just take a piece, and now we're going to deliver checkmate. This is a sad product for white. Yeah, white definitely didn't play like a 1600. I think our opponent really struggled to get out of the gate in the opening. Okay, bishop f2, queen f2 mate. Really only one big takeaway in this game. First of all, a good opportunity to review some theory. If white starts with f4, which is, again, the old school Grand Prix attack, nowadays most people start with knight c3. Does anybody know what is the best move for black? And we have faced this in previous speedruns on more than one occasion. So the most assiduous viewers will likely remember the best move here. Yeah, it is to play d5. And after e takes d5, you play this in a very similar fashion to the Alapin line, right? The Alapin line is based on the same principle, where you sack the pawn. If white plays c4, then there's this big hole on d4 that opens up. Here, it's even worse because white has a pawn on f4 that's sticking out like a sore thumb as well. So this position is just really good for black. And I've talked about it before. So our opponent started with d3 and then played f4. It doesn't really change what we do. We played d5. Okay, our opponent played e5. So far, they haven't done anything atrocious, but already it's not looking great because white is starting to fall behind in development and is making too many weakening pawn moves. Just a moment. Okay, so I'm just going to double check here. Yeah, after f6, black already has a pretty big advantage, but e takes f6 actually was a serious follow-up error that makes things even worse. White had to play knight f3 and just desperately get the king side out. c3 is the decisive mistake. After c3, the evaluation is +2 already after e5. Now, one thing I wanted to clarify, if white had taken and gone queen e2, this scares a lot of people. And a lot of people will automatically react with queen e7. But in fact, queen e7 is not the best response. Who can come up with the best response against queen e2? F6 just opens the center. That's the point. You're chipping away at white's pawn chain. This is not easy. But if you understand the bigger picture here and the fact that one minor piece isn't going to change the fact that white has no pieces out, you're going to find the right sequence. Okay, so it's not bishop g4. Now you're just giving away the knight with check. That's inefficient. What you want to do is you want to sacrifice this knight, but you want to force white to make the maximum number of moves in order to capture that knight, while also developing your pieces. What's the best way to do that? Well, I'm basically telling you the move. It's bishop d6. If white plays d4, you definitely want to swap the pawns. Now you castle. D takes e5, and the simplest is actually bishop takes e5. The evaluation here is +4, and you should really understand why. Now, obviously, queen takes e5, rook e8 loses the rook. That's not loses the queen. But let's say white plays a move like knight f3. Now you can play rook e8 anyway, just using the e-file, and again offering up the sacrifice. Winning the game is the move bishop to g4. trying to force the queen off of the e file. After e3, you have a lot of winning moves, such as queen to c7. You're going to pick up the knight, and it doesn't even feel like black is 2 pieces down. It feels like black is 2 pieces up. So hopefully this line made sense to people. Remember that if your opponent is playing in a dubious fashion, sacrificing a minor piece like this should be a default. You should identify the file on which you want to infiltrate, and if there happens to be a minor piece on that file, just sacrifice it. In the game, our opponent played another useless move, bishop d6, and after knight h5, that's it. White's position collapses completely. Any questions? Any questions? All right, guys, last game, last 5-minute game, and then we will call it a night. I'm showing you some typical ideas, but does that mean you will necessarily now, solve this correctly every time you have a similar situation? No, but that's the way improvement works. We have white against 1643, Nick Mueller. Let's start with e4. Okay, knight c6. We have faced this move before, and our response is knight f3. So if black plays e5, which is standard, then we've transposed. Okay, black plays d6. And this is essentially a version of the Pirc, usually. Usually black ends up playing g6, and we transpose into some version of the Pirc. But black can also play this in a very unique fashion by bringing the bishop out to g4. And there's actually quite a bit of theory in those lines. It's obviously a very dubious, very, very dubious opening for black, but it's not like losing or anything. It's just very meh. And what makes it very meh is not just the fact that it's objectively not that great. It's also the fact that white doesn't really have to know that much to get a big advantage or to get a sizable advantage. So there's a lot of theory that revolves around this move d5, but let's circumvent this move. Why do we need to bog ourselves down with that when we can play a perfectly fine, simple developing move and target this knight more straightforwardly with the move bishop to b5? I like bishop b5 here. And eventually, once we take c6, which is going to be right now, normally you might be looking at this and saying, well, I seem to remember that Daniel always says you don't really need to worry about the pawn structure opposite the side of the board where you're going to castle. And very likely both sides are going to castle to the king side. Why is this an exception? Well, it's an exception for 2 main reasons. The first is that white controls the center, and so it's quite easy for us to put pressure on these weak pawns. The second is that black is very poorly developed right now. So if black had all of his pieces developed, this would not be that big of a deal. But here it's a much bigger deal, at least until black completes their development. Let's castle. Rook to b8. Okay, and case in point, I'm going to throw in the move h3. So I'm going to throw in this move so that we have, bishop takes f3. Perfect. Thank you for the bishop. And now let's start putting pressure on these pawns, because we don't have forever. If we allow black to complete their kingside development, black is okay. So we need to act right now, and we need to start essentially just assaulting these pawns. And we have a very nice way of doing it, and that is to slide the queen to c3. How did I find this move? Well, there is that brief moment before your opponent completes the fianchetto where the rook is very vulnerable. And this is the source of a lot of blunders and a lot of missed opportunities and tactics. And here we go, d5, discovered attack. Knight f6 is forced. And as a matter of fact, let's not rush to play d takes c6 here. There is also the perfectly acceptable alternative bishop to e3, which does allow black to play c5. That is true. Black saves the pawn, but grants us tremendous positional advantages on the queen side. So it's largely a matter of taste. Plus, d takes c6 allows queen a8, and that leads to some weird complications that I don't necessarily want to allow. Let's go bishop e3, and let's speed up a little bit. Okay, now we basically play this Benoni style. Let's go knight d2. Now watch what I do. Queen a3, obviously have to get the queen out of the line of fire of the black bishop. And now we're going to play the very thematic positional move. I'm just looking for tactics. The knight's going to come around to c4, but there's no hurry to do that. We're going to play the move c3, which is really a move that I want people to pay attention to because it's incredibly effective at restricting the black bishop, and you should kind of keep this type of move in your pocket. Now we're going to deploy the rook. Now we're going to complete the knight maneuver, and we are just going to start applying Russian schoolboy-style pressure on the black position. Knight a5. Potsdam sees an outpost. Doesn't mean I'm going to go to c6 on the next move, but I'm going to threaten it. Okay, e6. Do we want this exchange? No, we do not, because we want this pawn to continue clamping down on black's position. That basically means we should protect it. Let's protect it. Okay, our opponent opens up the e-file for us, which is potentially beneficial. Now that the d5 pawn is under fire, we can play c4, but a far cooler way to protect the pawn is to stick the knight on the outpost first. Knight c6. Now let's play c4, removing the possibility of any undermining shenanigans with knight takes d5. Now we transition to some easy tactics. Easy but powerful. I'm looking at this rook. I'm seeing that it's trapped. And I'm seeing that if this diagonal opens up, we're very likely going to win an exchange. So the move is pretty obvious even without calculation, b4. But after c takes b4, an important question is, where do you actually move your queen? Because when you're aiming to win an exchange, for example, you have to remember that there exist situations where you give up too much stuff in return for the exchange. Like, you don't want to give up the knight on c6 and a pawn on c6. So the move there would actually be knight e7 check, by the way. Okay, now, of course, we should take on c5. And we can take on c5 again. And now we're knocking on the door of victory. Black still has not been able to just get these pieces out of the b file and out of these incredibly passive squares that they're sitting on. Okay, and now black starts blundering stuff. Bishop takes f8. Watch the f2 pawn. Right, a lot of people, they like playing queen b6 in these types of positions. So the moment a rook landed on b2, I'm already making a mental note to myself, okay, watch out for mate threats on f2. So I'm constantly trying to anticipate. It's like defensive driving, but in chess. Constantly trying to anticipate where the danger is going to come from. Except the only difference is you got to treat yourself like the idiot. Okay, now we have we have a large menu of options that end the game. One of them is to plug the diagonal with tempo with the move c5. And we're about to set up a gorgeous mating construction. How do we set it up? Now, if I was playing a bullet game, I would play rook b8 here and skewer the queen. Who can tell me how we set up essentially an unstoppable mate threat? So a lot of you guys see knight e7, but you're like, well, the king runs away. So take away the squares first, queen c3 first. This is how you often find quiet moves. You say, okay, well, this would be mate if it weren't for, this escape square. So can I take away the escape square first? And if your opponent is not threatening anything, the answer is often yes. Queen c3, knight e7, checkmate. And look at how all the pieces are participating. And the knight is the hero of the moment. The knight that traveled from b1 to d2 to c4 to a5 to c6 to e7 to deliver checkmate. Really nice. This was an instructive game. Unfortunately, it was only a 5-minute game, so I wasn't able to flesh out all the moments. I'm also very tired, so I'm not going to spend as long as I perhaps should on this game. But you guys can do some work too. I mean, people watching on YouTube, nothing is stopping you from, taking 5-10 minutes and doing some more analysis on these games on your own, God forbid. So I want to spotlight a couple of moments before I wrap up this episode. But yeah, definitely an instructive game, not necessarily a perfect game, but lots of cool positional concepts on display. So knight c6, knight f3, d6, okay. d4, bishop g4. So this position has been known for many, many decades. And traditionally, the topical move has always been d5. So first occurred in 1848, actually. So this is a very old line. And after d5, black has this move, knight e5. And here we get into ridiculous complications. White has this thematic idea, knight takes e5 and bishop b5 check. Where else does such an idea occur? Well, very famously in the Queen's Gambit Declined, there's a trap where black supposedly blunders the d7 pawn, but in reality, or the d5 pawn, but it's not a blunder, of course, as most of you know. You were able to take on d5 and deliver the check. But here this works very cleanly because white is forced to give up the queen and black emerges up a piece. In the Nimzovich, it's not as clean because black also has a pawn. And black can buy a tempo by pushing c6. And after dc, black has this move a6. So dc, a6. And after c7 check, white wins the queen back. ab, c takes d8. Let me see how the theory here goes. Yeah, c7, a takes b5, c takes d8, rook takes d8. And here there's a very important subtlety. Yeah, what is white's best move here? And the entire line hinges on this move. Were it not for this move, black equalizes, but because of this move, white has a big advantage here. Yeah, knight takes f7, desperado sack, and king takes d1, white is up a pawn. Unfortunately, this is only the tip of the iceberg, because in addition to a6, black can deliver a check on a5, trying to just remove this bishop from the board. Now, white's going to say, over my dead body, knight to c3, but suddenly it turns out black actually can castle queenside, and you get this position, which is much, much better / winning for white, but you don't want to spend hours, learning the variations here in the theory. There's no point in doing that when you have a very simple alternative. Many simple alternatives. We opted for bishop b5, very positional line. And a couple of moments I wanted to spotlight. The first was this queen c3 idea. Anytime your opponent has a pawn on g6 or on b6, but doesn't have a bishop on the corresponding fianchetto square, that is an extreme liability, because that diagonal is going to be wide open, and you're going to be able to exploit that in a variety of ways. Now, I've shown many times how I blundered a similar type of tactic, where in the following position, which I have shown probably a dozen times throughout the speedruns, but it's still very instructive the 13th time. In 2005, I was 1600, and I'm playing a person rated 1000. So I'm not taking him seriously, and I win the game very smoothly. And after the game, my coach yells at me, because in this position, I played the move b6, which actually loses on the spot. And my opponent responded with c4. I dropped the queen back, and, ignorance is bliss. I went on to win very smoothly. What did I miss? And there's a very specific detail here. There's only one move that does the trick, and it is knight to e5. And why is it specifically 95? Because any other knight move, the queen can drop back to d7. Here, you cover the d7 square, and you pre-move bishop f3. And there's literally nothing that black can do. Obviously, bishop b7, bishop f3, and black drops the bishop. And black simply loses a full rook. This is a game winner. So just be very, very attentive whenever there's a situation like this. Remember, a fianchetto takes 2 moves. And that is in itself already a drawback that can open up your opponent to a lot of tactical possibilities. So queen c3, d5. But here we switched to more positional play with knight to d2. Black just has a clunker of a pawn structure, this weak pawn on a6. Terrible rook on b6. Now restriction, queen a3 and c3, disarming this bishop. Rook fe1, just improving the position. Knight gets to a5, solidifying the d5 pawn. Everything we did was super, super straightforward. c4. And then at some point, we switched to tactics with the move b4. How did I spot this move? Well, I noticed that the rook was out of squares. That's how I found b4. And of course, the x-ray. And if black plays cb, a mistake here would be to play a move like queen d3, because here black is able to gain another pawn for the exchange, and this is actually not so bad for black. So white has a choice of options, but I really like this check on e7, just saving the knight. Now move your queen anywhere, and you're taking the full exchange on b6. So once black gave away this pawn, the game is over. Everything is collapsing. And the setup move, queen c3, setting up the mate on e7. Remember, a single quiet move can go a very long way. If the forcing options are not working, don't panic. And remind yourself, if your opponent doesn't have any direct threats, you have a tempo that you can use to set up mate threats and restrict your opponent's king activity. So restriction was a big theme in this game. Restricting the bishop's ability to get to g7. Restricting, the rook. Restricting the bishop on g7 with this c3 move. And restriction is a very, very nasty positional concept that can drive your opponent into the ground real quick, as we did in this game. All right, guys, it's late. I'm tired. This was a longer stream than anticipated once again. But I hope you enjoyed the speedrun episode and hope you had a good time. Thanks, guys.